The dust in Grit Creek, Nevada, tasted like failure. It coated Clara's tongue, settled in the creases of her worn dress, and stung her eyes. At 22, she looked closer to 30. The high, thin air and the relentless sun had baked lines into her face, and the shadow of her husband's hand had left a permanent caution in her gaze. Today, that shadow was a fresh, livid bruise on her cheek, a deep purple stain that throbbed with every beat of her heart. She stood across the rutted track from the Pick Gavel Saloon, leaning against a weak rail that promised nothing. She had been married to Jedediah for 2 years. 2 years of watching him pour their meager earnings into that dark doorway. He worked the silver mines when he was sober enough, earning good coin, but the money never made it home. It vanished in a haze of cheap whiskey and the slick slide of playing cards. Clara was hungry. The gnawing emptiness in her belly was a familiar companion, but today it was sharper. Jed had taken their last 2 bits that morning, shoving her against the cabin wall when she'd tried to hold back just enough for flour. The memory of the impact, the crack of her head against the rough wood, made her flinch. The bat-wing doors of the saloon swung open, spilling a raucous sound into the cold afternoon. Jed stumbled out, his face flushed with drink and fury. "Woman!" he roared. Spotting her, he stalked across the street, his steps uneven. "What are you doing? Spying on me? I was just waiting. Jed, it's cold. I thought we might go home." "Home?" he laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "We ain't got a home. I lost the credit at the company store. Lost it all." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the thin flesh above her elbow. "You're my bad luck. You are. Always looking at me with those sad, empty eyes." He dragged her toward the saloon. "No, Jed, please. I don't want to go in there." "You'll go where I tell you." He yanked her hard, pulling her off balance. She stumbled through the doors into the wall of smoke and noise. The saloon went quiet for a beat. Men at the tables looked up. Miners, a few prospectors, and a couple of cowboys nursing beers. They saw Jed, drunk and mean. They saw Clara, bruised and terrified. And then they looked back at their cards. It was not their business. Jed shoved her into a chair near the back, by a table where a game was still going. "You sit there and bring me some luck for once." He threw himself back into his seat, glaring at the cards. Across from him sat a man Clara had never seen before. He was quiet, dressed in worn canvas and leather, not miner's rags. He had a dark beard, trimmed short, and eyes that seemed to take in everything without moving. He looked like he belonged to the mountains, not this dusty pit. He had a stack of chips in front of him. Jed had almost none. Clara kept her head down, staring at the scarred wood of the table. She could feel the quiet man's gaze on her, but it wasn't the usual leering look she got from Jed's friends. It was just steady. "I'm in," Jed slurred, throwing his last few chips into the pot. The quiet man, Eli Turner, didn't speak. He just added a few chips of his own. The cards were dealt. Jed's face went from blotchy red to a pale, sick white. He had lost again. "Damn it!" he bellowed, slamming his fist on the table. "Damn this game! Damn this town!" "That's you out, friend," one of the other players said, gathering the pot. "No!" Jed's eyes were wild. He looked around, desperate. I got one more thing." He stood up, seized Clara's arm, and hauled her to her feet. She cried out, a small, choked sound. "What about her?" Jed shouted to the table. "She's worth something. She's my wife." The saloon went dead silent. Even the bartender stopped wiping his glass. This was a new low, even for Jed. "Jed, don't," Clara whispered, pulling back. He slapped her, a sharp, open-handed blow that snapped her head to the side and split her lip. Eli Turner, the quiet cowboy, looked at Jed. His voice was low and gravelly, cutting through the silence. "What are you saying?" "I'm selling her," Jed spat, tasting his victory. "I'm selling my bad luck wife. What am I bid?" No one spoke. The men looked away, disgusted but unwilling to step in. $5, Eli Turner said. The silence tightened. $5. It was an insult. It was the price of a broken shovel, of 2 bottles of bad whiskey. Jed's face twisted in humiliation. $5. She's my wife. And a saddle repair, Eli added, his gaze flat. My cinch is frayed. You pay the smithy to fix it. Clara felt the world drop out from under her. She was being bartered for $5 and a piece of leather. She was nothing, less than nothing. The shame was so total, so complete, it burned away her fear, leaving only a cold, hollow void. Jed stared at Eli, breathing hard. He was trapped. He had made the offer, and it had been met. To back down now would make him a fool, and his pride was the only thing he had left. Done, Jed snarled. He grabbed the $5 coin Eli slid across the table. He shoved Clara toward the cowboy. She's yours, and good riddance. Eli Turner stood up. He was taller than Jed, solid and calm. He didn't look at Jed. He didn't look at Clara. He just walked to the bar, paid for his drink, and turned toward the door. He paused, looked back at her, and nodded once. Come. She was an animal bought at market, numbly. She followed him. She walked past Jed, who refused to look at her, already ordering another drink with his $5. She walked past the silent men, their pity and disgust a physical weight on her back. She walked out of the saloon, into the biting wind, a piece of property that had just changed hands. Eli Turner didn't speak. He untied his horse, a sturdy-looking roan, and swung into the saddle. He had a pack mule tethered behind. He looked down at her. He didn't offer her a hand up. He didn't offer a kind word. He just waited. Clara, her cheek bleeding, her arm screaming where Jed had gripped it, put her foot on his stirrup and pulled herself up, sitting awkwardly behind him on the horse's rump. She did not touch him. She gripped the back of the saddle, her knuckles white. He clucked to the horse, and they moved. They rode out of Grit Creek without a word. Clara didn't look back. There was nothing there to see. The ride was a blur of misery. Clara was humiliated, terrified, and vibrating with a cold she couldn't name. It was deeper than the wind. It was the cold of knowing she had no say in her own life. Not a single word. Who was this man, this Eli Turner? He said nothing. He rode with an easy confidence, his back straight. He was taking her out of town. But where? To another, more isolated mine, to a brothel in the next county. Her mind, numbed by the sale, began to spark with new, sharper fears. Jed was a monster she knew. This man was a void. The trail began to climb almost immediately, leaving the sagebrush and dust of the low valley behind. They moved into sparse stands of juniper and pine. The wind grew teeth. It wasn't just blowing, it was cutting, finding every gap in her thin dress. Eli Turner rode on, seeming not to notice. After an hour, as the sun began to dip behind the sharp, snow-dusted peaks to the west, he finally stopped. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a heavy wool-lined canvas coat. He didn't look at her. He just handed it back. She took it, her fingers stiff. It was warm from his body, and it smelled of pine smoke and leather. She wrapped it around herself, a small, selfish act of survival. He said nothing, just nudged the horse forward, and the climbing began again. Now the snow appeared. At first, it was just patches in the shadows, old and crusty, but as they climbed higher, the patches joined, becoming a solid sheet of white, broken only by the black trunks of dead trees. The landscape was brutal. The pines were skeletal, their branches snapped by wind. The aspens stood in groves of pale, thin ghosts. Travel became nearly impossible. The horse stumbled and strained, blowing steam in great heaving clouds. The pack mule balked, and Eli had to dismount, walking ahead, breaking a trail through drifts that were sometimes waist deep. Clara was forced to walk, too. The snow soaked through her thin shoes, turning her feet into blocks of ice. The thin air burned her lungs. Once, a coyote howled, the sound so close it made her jump. It was answered by a chorus of yips and cries, a hungry choir in the twilight. The wilderness felt vast, empty, and ready to kill them. Clara refused to speak. What was there to say? Please take me back? Back to Jed? back to the saloon where she was worth $5. She hated this silent man for buying her, hated him for forcing her on this impossible journey. She would not give him the satisfaction of her tears. She would not give him her voice. It was full dark when they arrived. She had stopped feeling her feet hours ago. She was moving by pure, dumb instinct. Following the dark shape of the man in front of her, he stopped. She bumped into him. "We're here," he said. She looked up. There was nothing, just blackness, the white of the snow, and the relentless howl of the wind. Then she saw it, a low, dark shape against the deeper black of the pines. A small cabin. A thin curl of smoke rose from a stone chimney, instantly torn apart by the wind. He led the animals to a small lean-to barn, and Clara followed. Standing inside the relative quiet of the structure while he worked, he moved with an efficient, practiced grace. He unsaddled the horse, rubbed it down with straw, gave it feed. He did the same for the mule. He never rushed. He treated the animals with a gentle respect that felt strange, almost wrong, after the violence of the afternoon. Only when the animals were settled did he turn to the cabin. He picked up his saddlebags and rifle and walked to the door. He pushed it open and went inside. Clara hesitated. Was this it? Was this the place she would be abused or killed? The alternative was to stay in the barn. The cold was already seeping back into her bones. The howling of the coyotes sounded closer. She took a breath and walked into the cabin. It was one room, clean but stark. A stone hearth dominated one wall, a low fire glowing in its center. A rough post bed was in one corner. A simple table and 2 chairs were in the middle. Shelves held tins of food, flour sacks, and coffee. It smelled of wood smoke, leather, and smoked meat. It was the smell of solitude. Eli Turner did not look at her. He dropped his bags by the door and went to the fire, adding logs from a box nearby. The flames licked up, casting a flickering, warm light over the room. He gestured with his head to the far wall. "There's a cot." Clara saw it, a simple frame with a straw-stuffed mattress and a pile of folded blankets. It was as far from his own bed as it was possible to get in the small space. He moved to a small stove, dipped a ladle into a pot that sat simmering on the back. It was stew. He poured a bowl, added a piece of hard bread, and set it on the table. He gestured for her to sit. Then he served himself and sat opposite her. They ate in silence. The stew was thick with beans and some kind of wild meat, and it was hot. It burned a trail down her throat and settled in her stomach, the first real food she'd had all day. She ate, keeping her eyes on the bowl. She could feel him watching her, but when she risked a glance, he was looking at his own food. He treated her with a distant politeness that was more confusing than cruelty. He wasn't Jed. He wasn't loud or angry or drunk, but he wasn't kind either. He was just there, a quiet, solid presence that had bought her like a sack of oats. He never touched her. When she finished, he took her bowl, rinsed it in a bucket, and set it on a shelf. "Blankets are yours," he said, pointing to the cot. Then he sat in the chair by the fire, picked up a piece of leather, and began to mend a strap. He acted as if she wasn't even there. Clara went to the cot. She was bruised, heartsick, and exhausted, but her mind was racing. This man was a stranger. He was strong. She saw the muscles in his forearms as he worked the leather. He had a rifle, and he knew how to use it. She was sure she was trapped. She lay down on the cot, still in her damp dress and the man's heavy coat. She would not undress. She would not show weakness. She faced the wall, her body tense, listening to every sound, the scrape of his knife on the leather, the pop of the fire, the screaming wind outside. She tried to plan an escape. When he slept, she could run, but where? She looked at the cabin's single window. It was a pane of black, with snow drifting against the glass. The wind sounded like a living thing, a predator scratching at the walls. The coyotes were still howling. She realized with a sinking cold dread that the wilderness would kill her before she got a mile. She was trapped by the snow, by the cold, by the mountains. This man didn't need to lock the door. The winter had done it for him. She did not sleep. She drifted in a state of terrified, exhausted awareness. She heard him finally stand, bank the fire, and move to his own bed. He lay down. The cot creaked, and then just the wind. The next days fell into a strange, silent routine. Clara woke to the sound of him rising before dawn. He would pull on his boots, shrug into his coat, and go out to the barn to tend the stock. The sound of the door closing was her signal. She would get up, her body aching. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a sickly yellow-green. She felt old. She had to stay useful. Usefulness was the only currency she had ever known. A woman who was not useful was a burden, and burdens were discarded. Silently. She took over the cabin. She stoked the fire. She found the coffee and boiled a pot. She located the flour and salt, mixed a simple dough, and baked flatbread on the hearthstone. When he came back in, his beard frosted with ice, she had food on the table. He would nod, a small, curt gesture. Thank you. They would eat in silence. Then he would go out again, checking traps, or mending the barn roof, or splitting the mountain of firewood stacked against the cabin. Clara worked. She cleaned the floor. She mended his clothes, her stitches small and neat. She found a sack of potatoes and onions in a cold cellar under the floor and added them to the stew. She melted snow for water. She did everything she could think of to earn her keep, to make herself indispensable. It was a silent, desperate plea. I am useful. Do not hurt me. Do not cast me out. He never spoke of the sale. He never mentioned Jed. He never, ever touched her. He gave her space, a commodity she had never had. At night, he would sit by the fire, carving wood or reading a worn, coverless book. He seemed to exist in a world of his own, a world she just happened to occupy. Her fear of him began to change. It was no longer the sharp terror of imminent violence, but a dull, confused ache of uncertainty. One night, she woke with a start. The wind had died down, and in the silence, a new sound had come, a low, coughing snarl, followed by the terrified scream of a horse. Before she was even sitting up, Eli was moving. He was out of his bed, rifle in hand, boots on, and out the door in 3 seconds. He didn't make a sound. Clara ran to the door, her heart hammering. She peered out into the moonlit snow. The barn was about 50 yards away. She saw the horse, eyes wide, rearing against the corral fence. And then she saw the shadow. It was a cougar, long, sleek, and powerful. It was crouched on the snow-drifted roof of the lean-to. Staring down at the horse, it was starvation-thin, driven down from the high rocks by hunger. Eli was standing by the corner of the cabin, half hidden. He raised the rifle. He didn't fire. He was steady, waiting. He whistled. A low, sharp sound. The cat's head snapped toward him. It hissed, a sound that scraped the air and bared its teeth. It gathered its powerful haunches. Not to retreat, but to leap. The rifle cracked. The sound was immense in the frozen silence. The cougar leaped, but it was a dead thing. Its spine severed. It hit the snow in a heavy, still heap. Eli didn't move for a long moment. He watched the cat. Then he walked calmly to the barn, speaking in a low, soothing voice to the horse, running a hand down its trembling flank. He checked the other animals. Only when he was satisfied they were safe did he walk back to the cabin. Clara was still standing in the doorway, her hands pressed to her mouth. He stopped in front of her, his rifle hanging in one hand. The moonlight hit his face. He looked tired, but calm. "It's done," he said. "Go back to bed. It's cold." He stepped past her into the cabin, and as he did, the dam inside Clara broke. It wasn't the fear. It wasn't the cat. It was him. It was the simple, quiet courage. The way he had moved between the danger and the things in his care. Jed would have hidden. Jed would have let the horse be torn to pieces. Jed would have blamed her for it. This man, this stranger who owned her, had faced the danger. He had protected his home. He had protected her. She slid down the rough wood of the door frame and put her face in her hands. The sobs came from a place so deep she didn't know it existed. They were not quiet. They were the racking, ugly tears of 2 years of terror, of humiliation, of hunger, of being sold. All of it poured out of her in the quiet cabin. Eli stopped. He stood by the hearth, his back to her, clearly uncomfortable. He didn't know what to do. He didn't pat her shoulder. He didn't offer empty words. He just stood there, waiting, letting her cry. She wept until her body ached and her throat was raw. She wept until there was nothing left but shudders. Finally, she quieted, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her dress. She felt raw, empty, and ashamed. He spoke, his voice still low, not unkind. The snow will clear by May, maybe June, this high up. She looked at his back, confused. He turned, his face shadowed. You can stay as long as you want. When the spring comes, you can leave. Go to another town. Go wherever you please. I won't stop you. He looked at her then, his gaze direct, making sure she understood. I won't ask anything of you. You don't owe me, no strings, no demands. He turned back to the fire, took a cloth, and began to meticulously clean his rifle. The offer, the first real choice she had been given in years, hung in the warm, smoky air. She was free to leave, but she was trapped, more completely than ever, by the snow, the mountains, and the terrifying, silent kindness of the man who had bought her for $5. Eli's promise, that simple offer of freedom come spring, changed the air in the cabin. It did not make them friends. It did not make the silence comfortable, but it took the sharp edge of animal terror off Clara's existence. She was no longer a trapped thing waiting for the blow to fall. She was a person, waiting for the snow to melt. The tense, quiet coexistence continued, but its quality shifted. Clara began to watch Eli, not with fear, but with a deep, cataloging curiosity. He was a man of rigid structure. He rose at the same time every morning, the darkness still thick and blue outside the window. He moved with a heavy, deliberate economy, never wasting a step. He would check the stock, his voice a low rumble as he spoke to the horse, a sound she never heard directed at her. He would return, eat the food she prepared, and then work until the light failed. His isolation was a wall as solid as the cabin logs. He never spoke of the town, of other people, of a past beyond the one she already knew. He was a stoic man, taking the world as it came, his face revealing nothing. But she saw the scars. She saw them in the way he never sat with his back to the door, the way he always had his skinning knife on his belt, even when he was just reading by the fire. She saw it in the sudden, violent way he would sometimes split firewood, as if he were not just cutting the wood, but battling something inside it, his breath hissing through his teeth. He was a man built of hard edges and quiet griefs, and she, bruised and silent, was a mirror of him. She knew she had to earn her keep, not for him, but for herself. To be a guest was one thing, to be a dependent was another. She had been a dependent on Jed, and it had cost her everything. She would be a partner, even a silent one. She started small. The cabin was spotless. His mending was always done, her stitches finer than his own clumsy ones. But the inside work was not enough. The cabin was small, the work finite. The real ranch, the real survival, was outside. One cold, bright morning, she put on the heavy coat he had given her, she now thought of it as hers, and went to the wood pile. He was in the barn. She picked up the heavy axe, hefted it, and tried to swing it as she had seen him do. The head of the axe glanced off the round of pine with a pathetic thunk, biting in barely an inch. The force of the blow, misaligned, sent a painful vibration up her arms. She tried again, grunting, putting all her weight into it. The axe bounced, nearly twisting from her grip. "You'll break your wrist that way," she gasped, dropping the axe. Eli was standing 10 feet away, watching her, his face unreadable. She flushed with shame. "I was just trying to help." He walked over, picked up the axe. "You're fighting it. Let the weight do the work." He stood beside her, his presence a solid block of warmth in the freezing air. He didn't touch her. He just showed her. "Brace your feet, like this. Grip low. Slide your top hand down. Don't aim. Just let it fall." He swung. The axe sank deep, splitting the log in a single, clean blow. He set up another piece. "Try." She did. Her form was clumsy. The wood did not split, but the axe hit true. "Again," he said. She tried again. And again. For nearly an hour. She worked, her muscles screaming, her hands blistering inside her thin gloves. He stood by, sorting the split wood, offering a quiet correction now and then. "Breathe out. Follow through." She was clumsy. She was weak, but she was learning. When she finally had to stop, her arms shaking, there was a small, respectable pile of split wood at her feet. She had done something. She helped him carry water, hauling the heavy buckets from the well he'd had to hack free of ice. She learned to clean the barn, to check the traps on the tree line for rabbits. She was slow, and she made mistakes, but she worked until her back ached and her hands were raw. Eli never praised her. He just accepted her help, treating her not as a woman, but as another hand, for Clara. That was a greater kindness than any soft word. The deep winter held them in its fist. Weeks passed. The world was white and gray and black. Then the storm came. It arrived not with a roar, but with a whisper. The sky turned a flat, sick white, and the air went completely still. "It's a bad one," Eli said, sniffing the air as he came in from the barn. "Stay inside. Keep the fire high." He pulled his heaviest coat on, checked his rifle, and strapped snowshoes to his pack. "Where are you going?" Clara asked, panic rising in her throat. The cabin was safety. The outside was death. "Have to check the high traps, and the mare. She's spooked by this weather. Might try to bolt the corral." "Can it not wait?" "No," he said, his voice final. He left. Clara waited. The wind began to rise, a low moan that grew into a physical, pounding scream. Snow began to fly, not down, but sideways. The world vanished in a solid, churning wall of white. It was a whiteout, a blizzard of the high country, and it was terrifying. She kept the fire roaring. She made stew. She paced the small room. An hour passed, then 2. The weak gray light of afternoon began to fail. He should have been back. Another hour. It was near dark. The wind was so loud she could feel the cabin logs vibrating. Fear, cold and sharp, settled in her belly. He was out there. He was alone. She couldn't stay. She couldn't just wait. She pulled on her coat, wrapped a scarf over her face, and grabbed the lantern. She opened the cabin door and was nearly thrown back by the force of the wind. "Eli!" she screamed, but the wind tore the word from her mouth and shredded it. She fought her way to the barn, staggering through drifts that were already past her knees. The animals were safe, huddled and stamping, but Eli was not there. She went to the edge of the tree line, holding the lantern high. It lit nothing but a swirling vortex of snow. "Eli!" She thought she heard something, a groan. Lost in the shriek of the wind, she pushed forward, off the path, into the deeper snow. She found him 20 yards from the tree line. He was on his knees, crawling. His horse was gone. He was covered in snow. A pale ghost. "Clara!" he gasped, his voice tight with agony. He looked up, his face gray. My shoulder. He had fallen. The horse had stumbled in a hidden drift, thrown him against a buried rock, and bolted. He had been crawling for an hour. "Can you stand?" she cried, grabbing his arm. He roared in pain as she touched him, a sound that cut through the wind. "No, it's out." He was a big man, and she was small, but the fear that had paralyzed her for 2 years was gone, burned away by a new, more powerful terror. She would not let this man die. "Get up," she ordered, her voice as harsh as the wind. "You will not die here." She put her shoulder under his good arm, taking his weight. She wrapped her other arm around his waist. He was a dead, heavy load. He groaned, biting back the pain, and tried to move his legs. It was a nightmare. They moved one step at a time. The snow was a quicksand, pulling at them. The wind tried to rip them apart. Clara's lungs burned. Her legs were numb. She did not drag him. She willed him, carrying him with a strength she never knew she possessed. It was a brutal, agonizing journey back to the cabin. She kicked the door open and they fell inside, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of snow and pain. Eli was pale, his teeth chattering. He was sweating despite the cold. "The bed," she panted. She helped him, half lifting, half dragging, until he slumped onto his mattress. His coat was frozen stiff. His shirt underneath was wet. "We have to get these off," she said, her hands trembling. She had to cut the heavy canvas coat away, then his wool shirt. It was soaked in sweat and snow. She pulled the torn, wet fabric from his skin, and she stopped. The firelight flickered over his back. It was a road map of cruelty. Old, white, raised lines, thick as rope, crisscrossed his skin from his shoulders to his waist. There were dozens of them. Some were thin and faded. Others were angry. Puckered scars that spoke of wounds left to fester. It was the pattern of a whip, a lifetime of pain, carved into his back. Her breath hitched. She had seen Jed's anger. She had felt his belt. But this was something else. This was systematic, brutal, and old. Eli was watching her, his face taut with pain, but his eyes were sharp. He saw the horror on her face. "It's old," he rasped, his voice tight with a shame that was deeper than the pain. Clara swallowed. She said nothing. She looked from the scars to his face. She understood the wall of isolation. She understood the man who never showed his back, the man who lived alone in the snow. She nodded once, a quick, jerky motion. She went to the shelf, found his bottle of whiskey. She poured a cup, her hand shaking so hard she spilled some. "Drink this," she said. He took it in his left hand and drank it down, hissing as it burned. "This will hurt," she said. She grabbed a piece of leather from his mending pile. "Bite this." He put the leather between his teeth. Clara looked at the shoulder. It was dislocated, a sick, unnatural angle. She had seen this once, a farmhand who fell from a loft. She knew what she had to do. She braced her foot against his ribs. She grabbed his injured arm at the wrist and elbow. "Breathe," she commanded. She pulled. Eli bellowed into the leather, his whole body arching off the bed. Clara pulled harder, using all her weight. Her teeth gritted. There was a wet, sickening pop. He slumped back, his eyes rolling, half unconscious. The shoulder was back in its socket. He had a fever. For 3 days, the storm raged outside, and Eli raged within. He thrashed in the bed, the pain and the fever tangling him in memories. He cried out, not for her, but for someone named Sarah. He spoke in short, broken phrases. "No, Pa, don't, please." Clara did not leave his side. She bathed his face with snow. She forced broth and water between his lips. She sat in the chair by his bed, watching him, listening to the fragments of his past. She kept the fire high, a lone beacon of warmth against the howling white world. The power in the cabin had shifted. The strong, silent man was helpless. The bought, broken woman was his only anchor. On the 4th morning, the storm broke. The world outside was silent, buried in white, the sun a blinding glare. Clara woke in the chair to find Eli staring at her. His eyes were clear. The fever was gone. "You stayed," he whispered. His voice was a dry scratch. "I stayed," she said. She got him water. He drank it slowly. He was weak for days. The cabin became their entire world. Clara was in charge. She cooked, she tended the fire, and she tended to him. She had to find clean cloth for new bandages. She looked in the carved wooden chest at the foot of his bed. She knew she shouldn't, but she was desperate. Under his spare clothes, she found it, a leather-bound sketchbook. Her fingers touched it. It felt intensely private. She shouldn't, but she was starved for any sign of the man behind the scars. She opened it. He could draw. The pages were filled with beautiful, sensitive charcoal sketches. His horse, the roan, captured in perfect muscle detail. The view from the cabin porch, the sharp lines of the mountains against the sky. A dead, twisted pine tree, drawn with such detail it felt alive. It was his inner world, a world of silent, lonely beauty. She turned a page, and her heart stopped. It was a woman. She was young, with wild, dark hair. Her face was turned away, her hands pressed to her eyes. She was crying. The lines of the drawing were dark, pressed hard into the paper, as if the charcoal itself held an angry, desperate grief. "What are you looking at?" Clara flinched, dropping the book as if it had burned her. Eli was watching her. He had pushed himself up on his good arm. His face was not angry. It was empty, devastated. I'm sorry," she stammered, the old fear of Jed rising in her. "I was looking for cloth, for bandages. I didn't mean—" He just looked at the book, lying open on the floor. He seemed to shrink. The strong man who fought cougars and blizzards looked, for a moment, like a small, broken boy. He nodded toward the book. "That was my mother." Clara knelt, picked it up, and held it. She didn't know what to say. The silence stretched, filled only by the drip of melting snow from the eaves. "Her name was Sarah," he said, his voice so quiet she had to lean in. "She loved to sing. She had this little bird in a cage. She sang to it, even when he was drinking, even when he was angry. She would sing until she didn't." Clara looked at the drawing of the crying woman. She looked at the scars she knew were hidden under his shirt. She pieced it together. "My father," Eli said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "He killed her. He came home. He had lost at cards. She tried to stop him from taking the last of the food money. He beat her to death." He paused, and his eyes unfocused, looking at the cabin wall, but seeing something years ago. "I hid. I was 8 years old. I hid under the porch. I listened. I listened to it all. I never did anything." He was not talking to her. He was confessing to the room, to the ghosts. This was his secret. This was the man. Not a buyer of women, but a boy who had failed to save his mother, and had been trying to save her ever since. He had seen Jed in that saloon. He had seen his father, and in her, he had seen Sarah. Clara's heart ached, a sharp, physical pain. She understood his guilt, his isolation. It matched her own. She didn't have words. Words were useless. So she moved. She sat on the edge of his bed, took his good left hand. It was rough, calloused. He stiffened, his entire body going rigid. His instinct was to pull away, to retreat back behind the wall. Clara just held on, gently. She did not squeeze. She did not stroke. She just held it. A simple, human connection. He stared at their joined hands. A single tear tracked down his face, cutting a path through the grime and stubble. He closed his eyes, and, for the first time, he did not pull away. The storm was over, but the thaw inside the cabin had just begun. The silence was broken. As he recovered, they talked. It came in fits and starts, in the quiet of the evening, with the fire crackling between them. He told her about his father, the rages, and the final, terrible night. He told her about running, about working on ranches since he was 10, about saving every penny to buy this piece of high, lonely land where no one could ever touch him again. She, in turn, told him about Jed. Not the sale, but the years before, the constant fear, the small humiliations, the mean, cutting words. And then, one night, she told him the secret she had never spoken aloud. "I was with child," she whispered, staring into the flames. "About a year ago, I had not told him. I was afraid. He came home drunk. He was angry that I had not mended his shirt. He shoved me. I fell off the porch, down the 2 steps. It was enough." She stopped. Eli said nothing. He just sat there, his good hand clenching and unclenching on his knee. He was radiating a still, cold fury that was more frightening than Jed's hot rages, but it was not directed at her. "You were just a boy." "Eli," she said softly, answering his own confession. "You were only 8. You couldn't have done anything." He looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers. "And you were just a woman. You couldn't have done anything, either." A fragile, aching understanding settled between them. They were 2 survivors, marked by the same kind of violence. The mood shifted. As he grew stronger, the deep, heavy grief began to lift, replaced by something lighter. He was still limited, his arm in a sling she had fashioned. He tried to split wood one-handed, and it was a clumsy, comical failure. A sound bubbled up in Clara's throat. It was rusty, unused. A laugh. She clapped her hand over her mouth. Shocked. Eli stopped, looked at her, and a slow, almost painful smile creased his face. It was the first time she had seen it. It reached his eyes. "What?" he said, the smile in his voice. "You think you can do better?" "I know I can't," she said, and laughed again. The flirtation, when it came, was as clumsy as his one-handed wood-splitting. They would retreat when the emotions got too close. He would notice her hair, which she had taken to brushing and braiding. "It's brown," he said, as if noticing for the first time. She would blush, and they would both find reasons to look away. But something in Clara was waking up. A part of her she thought Jed had killed. She felt safe, and with safety came a warmth that spread through her belly when he smiled. She would watch his good hand as he carved, or the way his eyes crinkled when he looked at his horse. She felt a pull, a desire, and it terrified her. It was a deep, biting shame. How could she feel this? For any man? After what Jed had done. Her body had been a prison, a thing of duty and pain. Now, it was betraying her with a feeling of want, and for him, the man who had bought her, she felt dirty, spoiled. She pulled back, becoming quiet and distant again, fighting a war with herself. Weeks passed. The snow was still deep, but the sun had a new warmth. Spring was a promise, far off, but real. They were outside, mending the corral fence that the cougar had spooked the horse into breaking. He was hammering, his shoulder healed enough for light work. She was holding the rail steady for him. It was late afternoon. A gentle, quiet snow began to fall, the flakes fat and lazy in the still air. Clara finished with her rail, tilted her head back, closing her eyes, letting the cold, clean flakes melt on her face. It was a moment of pure peace. She opened her eyes. Eli had stopped hammering. He was watching her. He was standing closer than she had realized. The world was utterly silent. Just the soft sound of the falling snow. "You have snow on your cheek," he said. His voice was thick. He reached up. He didn't use his whole hand. He moved slowly, his gaze locked on hers, asking permission. He extended one calloused finger. Clara did not move. She did not breathe. He gently, so gently, brushed the melting snowflake from her skin. His touch was rough, but it was not the touch of ownership. It was not the touch of violence. It was a touch that asked, that revered. It sent a jolt straight through her, sharp and electric. They stared at each other. The space between them thrummed. He leaned in. It was achingly slow. She could have pulled back. She could have turned her head. She had every reason to. She was his property. She was ashamed of her desire. She did not move. She tilted her chin up. Their first kiss was not smooth. It was hesitant. Chapped lips meeting chapped lips. It was cold from the snow and hot from their breath. It was awkward and questioning. And then something broke, a deep, buried warmth. She tasted him, the faint flavor of coffee in winter. She leaned into it, just a fraction. Her hand came up, not to push him away, but to grip the rough canvas of his coat. His good hand came up, cupped her jaw, his thumb brushing her skin. The kiss deepened. It was not a kiss of passion, not yet. It was a kiss of survival, a kiss of discovery. It was slow and deep, and it felt like the first true thing that had happened to her in her entire life. He pulled back first, his breath ragged. His eyes were dark, searching hers. Neither of them said a word. The snow fell around them, blanketing the scarred land, and the silent, broken people who were just beginning to heal. That kiss in the snow changed the silence. Before, it had been a shared, empty space. Now, it was a quiet, thrumming thing, filled with what had not been said. The distance Eli had so carefully maintained was gone, replaced by a new, shared awareness. They fell back into their routine, but it was different. There was warmth. When Clara handed him his coffee in the morning, their fingers would brush, and he would hold her gaze for just a beat too long. When he came in from the cold, he would stand by the fire, and she would find a reason to be near him, organizing the wood or stirring the stew, absorbing the heat from his body. They were two people, guarded and scarred, who had accidentally found a small, dangerous comfort. The guardedness was still there, a sharp, reflexive thing. If a glance held too long, one of them would look away, flushing, and find a sudden, urgent task. If their arms touched when working together, they would both pull back, as if burned. They were trespassers in a new country, and every step was fraught. Eli, especially, seemed to be fighting a battle with himself. He would watch her, his face a mask of hunger and deep, profound restraint. And then he would abruptly leave the cabin, going to split wood with a violence that left him breathless. Clara, too, was at war. The desire she had felt was no longer a shameful secret. It was a constant, aching warmth. It terrified her. She had been property. She had been used. Her body had been a thing of duty and pain. To feel it want something was a deep betrayal of, she wasn't sure what, of her own survival. But she was safe. That was the truth that unraveled her. Eli had not hurt her. He had protected her. He had given her a choice. And in that safety, the long-dormant woman inside her was waking up, and she was starved for a touch that was not cruel. The tension built for a week. It was in the air, in the way they moved around each other in the small cabin, a silent, invisible dance of advance and retreat. One night, the cabin was too warm. The fire was high, the wind was still. Eli sat at the table, mending a bridle, his head bent, the firelight catching the strong lines of his neck. Clara had been watching him for an hour, her heart a heavy, slow drum. She could not bear the silence, the not knowing, any longer. She was still, in her mind, the woman Jed had taught her to be, a creature whose only value was in her use. She had to earn her keep. She had to pay for the safety he had given her. Trembling, her hands so unsteady she could barely work the small buttons, she stood by the hearth and began to unfasten her dress. Eli's head snapped up. The bridle fell from his hands. He watched her, his face frozen, as she fumbled with the top button. Her fingers were numb. "Clara," he said, his voice a low, warning rumble. I need to thank you," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the floor. She could not look at him. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. For my keep, for everything." She was offering herself. It was the only coin she had. She was terrified he would take it, and more terrified that he would not. He stood up. The chair scraped back, a raw, ugly sound. He crossed the room in 2 strides. She flinched, her hands flying up to cover her face, expecting a blow, expecting the roughness of a man taking what he was offered. He did not touch her. He just stood there. She lowered her hands. He looked pained. His face was a mask of agony. "No," he whispered. He reached out, his hands shaking, and his rough, calloused fingers were impossibly gentle. He took the button she had undone, and slowly, deliberately, he fastened it. He did the next one. He buttoned her dress back up to her throat, his knuckles brushing her skin, sending fire through her. "Not like this," he said, his voice thick. Not for your keep. That is not what I want." She looked at him, confused, tears welling. "But I don't. What else?" He gripped her shoulders, his hold firm but not cruel. He made her look at him. "Not until you're free in your heart," he said, his voice raw. "Not until you are so far from him, so far from that saloon, that you forget what $5 looks like. You are not a debt to be paid. Clara, I will not be another man who takes from you." He let her go, stepped back, and the space between them was vibrating. He had refused her. He had refused to own her. He had, in that one act, given her back a piece of herself she thought was gone forever. That night, the tension did not fade, but it changed. The cot was in the coldest part of the cabin. She was always waking up, shivering. He saw it. "This is foolish," he said, his voice abrupt. He was staring at the cot, not at her. "I'll take the floor. You take the bed. It's warmer." "No," she said. Her pride stung. "I won't put you out of your own bed. The cot it's fine." "It's not fine. You're frozen." He sighed, scrubbing a hand over his face. He looked exhausted. "The bed is wide. It was my parents' bed. It's wide enough." The offer hung in the air. It was practical. It was logical. And it was the most terrifying, intimate thing she could imagine. "Just for sleep," he said, seeing the fear in her face. "For warmth, I swear it. Clara, on my mother's grave, I will not touch you." She believed him. She took her one thin blanket and walked to the bed. She lay on the very edge, her back to the center, her body rigid. She heard him bank the fire, heard his boots drop to the floor. The ropes of the bed creaked as he lay down on the other side, his back to her. The bed was a continent. The silence was absolute. Clara lay awake, rigid, listening to him breathe. He was a solid, warm presence just inches away. She was so cold. After an hour, he spoke, his voice muffled. "You are shivering so hard the whole bed is shaking. For God's sakes, Clara, come to the middle. Take the warmth." She hesitated. Then, slowly, she shifted, moving just a few inches toward the center, where the heat from his body had gathered in the blankets. It was warm. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. She slept, really slept, deeply, and without fear. When she woke, the sun was streaming in. She was alone in the bed. He was already outside, the sound of his axe splitting wood. That became the new routine. They slept in the same bed, a small, chaste distance between them, sharing warmth. Some nights they lay back to back, a ridge of blankets between them. Other nights, the cold was so deep they simply huddled, a silent agreement. One night, her cold foot brushed his leg, and he didn't pull away. Another night, she woke to find her hand had crept across the blanket to rest on his arm. It was an intimacy deeper than any she had ever known. It was all trust. And then, spring came. It came not as a gentle thaw, but as a roaring, dripping, muddy mess. The world, locked in white, suddenly gave way. The snow melted, the creeks roared. The ground turned to a thick, grasping mud, and the pass, the way out, was clearing. Eli grew quiet again. The promise he had made her hung between them. "When spring comes, you can leave," he said it one morning, his back to her, as he poured coffee. "The pass to Carson City will be clear in a week, maybe less." Clara stopped stirring the oatmeal. "I know. You'll need supplies. I can give you the mule, and money, enough to get started." She turned and looked at him. He would not meet her eyes. He was offering her the freedom he had promised. He was letting her go. "I'm not going," she said. He turned, his face shocked. "What?" "I am not going." She said it stronger. I don't want to go to Carson City. Clara, you don't owe me. You're free. You don't have to stay here." "I know," she said, and her voice shook, but she held his gaze. "I know I don't have to. I want to. This is the only place I have ever felt safe." She took a breath. "You have cattle, in the high pasture. You said they wintered up there." He nodded, confused. "Aye, a small herd, maybe 20 head. I have to bring them down before they go too high." "Then I am helping you," she said. It was not a request. He stared at her, a slow, dawning comprehension on his face. This was not the broken woman he had bought. This was a woman planting her feet. "It's hard work, Clara. Dangerous. It's no place for a woman?" She cut in, her voice sharp. "I am stronger than I look. I will not be a burden. Eli, I will not just cook and clean while you do all the work. I am staying, and I am helping. I want to belong here. A slow, hesitant smile touched his lips. All right, then. We ride tomorrow. The world was new. The mud was deep, but the air was electric with the smell of pine and damp earth and new life. Clara felt new. Eli had given her his gentlest horse, a buckskin mare. She was not a good rider, but she was stubborn. She was determined to prove she was not the $5 whore from the saloon. She was Clara, a rancher. They found the cattle in a high meadow, lean and shaggy from the winter, but alive. The work was hard, it was cold, and the ground was treacherous, but it was exhilarating. She learned to whoop, to slap her rope on her chaps to turn astray. She learned to ride with the slope, to anticipate the cattle's moves. Eli worked beside her, his quiet competence a thing to marvel at. He treated her as an equal. He didn't coddle her. He gave her tasks, and he trusted her to do them. By the end of the second day, they had the herd bunched and were pushing them down a narrow canyon toward the ranch. That's when they saw the riders. 2 men, slumped in their saddles, appeared from a side trail, blocking the path. They were rough-looking, in greasy canvas and worn-out hats. They looked at the cattle, then at Eli, then at Clara. One of them, a man with a stained yellow beard, grinned, showing broken teeth. "Well, looky here, Ben," he said to his partner, "a man doing cattle work, and he brought his entertainment." The other man, younger and thinner, laughed. "She a pretty one, too. You renting her out, friend? Or did you just find her?" Clara froze. Her blood turned to ice. It was happening again. She was just a thing, a harlot. "Ride on," Eli said, his voice a low, flat command. He moved his horse slightly, putting himself between Clara and the men. "Now, hold on," the yellow-bearded man said, his grin fading. "We ain't meant no offense. We just been in the hills a long time. A man gets lonely. We'd be happy to pay for an hour of her time. Save you the trouble." "I said," Eli repeated, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "Right on." The man's eyes narrowed. He looked at his partner. "He's just one man. Ben. And he's got the woman and the cattle? I'm feeling greedy." The man named Ben reached for the pistol at his hip. Clara screamed, "Eli!" Eli was a blur. He wasn't a rancher anymore. He was the cougar killer. He was off his horse before Ben's gun had even cleared the holster. He lunged, not for the man with the gun, but for the one who had spoken. He grabbed the yellow-bearded man by his coat and ripped him from the saddle. The man hit the ground hard. Eli was on him, his fist a hammer. The sound of it, a wet, heavy crack as it hit the man's face, echoed in the canyon. Ben, stunned, finally got his gun free. He fired. The shot was wild, the bullet whining off the rock wall high above. Clara's horse reared, screaming. Eli was on his feet, turning. He grabbed a rock from the canyon floor. Ben fired again. Eli charged him, low and fast, like a wolf. He hit the man's gun arm with the rock. Clara heard a bone snap. The man howled, dropping the pistol. Eli hit him in the throat with his other fist. The man collapsed, gagging, but Eli wasn't done. The other man, the yellow-bearded one, was trying to crawl away, his face a mask of blood. Eli turned to him. The look on Eli's face, it wasn't him, it was a stranger. His eyes were black, empty, and filled with a rage that was biblical. It was the rage of a boy who had hidden under a porch. He grabbed the whimpering man, hauled him to his feet, and began to hit him. He was not just fighting, he was executing. "Eli!" Clara screamed. He didn't hear her. He was lost in a red, dark place. He hit the man again and again, the man's head snapping back, limp. "Eli, stop!" Clara scrambled off her horse, running, stumbling in the mud. "Stop! You're killing him!" She grabbed his arm. He threw her off, his strength immense. She fell hard, hitting her shoulder on the rocky ground. He didn't even see her. He was raising the rock high, ready to bring it down on the man's skull. "Eli!" she screamed, sobbing, her voice breaking. "It's me! It's Clara! Please, stop!" The name, her voice, it cut through the red fog. He froze. The rock held high. He was breathing in great, ragged gasps. He looked at the bloody, unconscious man at his feet. He looked at his own hands, covered in blood. He looked at Clara, sobbing in the mud, staring at him in terror. The rage drained out of him, leaving him shaking, pale, and horrified. "Clara," he whispered. He dropped the rock. He backed away from the men, his hands held up, as if to show he was no longer a threat. Oh God, Clara." He had seen his father in them, and in his own fists. He had seen his father, too. They got the cattle back to the ranch in a thick, terrible silence. Eli tied the two men, one unconscious, the other with a broken arm, onto their horses and sent them running down the canyon. He knew they wouldn't be back. That night, the cabin was a prison. Eli sat by the fire, staring at his scrubbed raw hands. He would not look at her. Clara had retreated to the cot, the cold plank of wood a barrier. She was huddled under her blanket, shaking. He had terrified her. She had seen the part of him he kept locked away, the part that was born of his father's violence. Finally, she spoke, her voice small. "I was so scared." He flinched, as if she had hit him. "Clara, I would never touch you. I lost, I don't know what." "No," she said, and her voice was stronger. He looked up. She was sitting on the cot, her eyes fixed on him. "I wasn't afraid of you, Eli. I knew you wouldn't hurt me." He was confused. "But you were shaking. I was scared of them," she said, the words tumbling out. "Of what they said, of what they saw when they looked at me. That I'm just a thing, a harlot, something to be used and taken. That no matter what I do, no matter how hard I work, that's all I'll ever be." Her voice broke. "I'm so afraid of being owned again. I'm so afraid of men who break." He listened. He didn't speak. He just absorbed her words. He saw the truth of it. He had saved her from Jed, but he hadn't saved her from the world. He stood up. He didn't come to her, didn't offer empty comfort. He went to his box of tools. He found a good, clean piece of pine. He sat down, pulled out his knife, and began to work. He worked all night. He didn't sleep. He carved. In the morning, he had made a small, beautiful wooden box, sanded smooth, with a lid that fit perfectly. He brought it to her. "The past," he said, his voice rough from the long night. "It needs a grave. We put it in here, and we burn it." Clara looked at the box. She understood. She went to her small bag of things she'd had when she arrived. From the bottom, she pulled the thin, cheap, gold-plated ring that Jet had put on her finger. She looked at it, the symbol of her bondage. She dropped it in the box. It made a small, sad sound. "My wedding dress," she said. It was in the bag, too, a faded, simple calico, the one she'd worn that day, full of hope that had died so quickly. She folded it and placed it inside. Then she looked at him. He nodded. He went to his own chest, the one with the sketchbook. From the very bottom, he pulled a dark green bottle, half full of whiskey. "My father's," he said, his voice tight. "It's the last one. The one he was drinking. That night. I've carried it for 10 years. I don't know why." He placed the bottle in the box with her ring and her dress. He put the lid on. They went outside. The sun was just rising, painting the high snow peaks in shades of pink and gold, under the open sky. He built a small, clean fire, well away from the cabin. He handed the box to her. She held it. It was heavy. It was all her pain, all her shame. It was all his. She knelt and placed it on the kindling. They stood side by side and watched it catch. They watched the pine warp, and the smoke, black and thick, rise into the clean morning air. They watched until the box was gone, until it was nothing but a pile of glowing, white ash. A funeral. They went back inside. The air in the cabin was different. It was clear. The ghosts were gone. Eli stood in the center of the room, looking at her. He didn't look like a killer. He didn't look like a boy. He just looked like a man. "Clara," he said. He walked to her. He touched her cheek. his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't known had fallen. She leaned into his hand, and this time she kissed him. It was not the hesitant, snowy kiss of before. It was a kiss of need, a kiss of choice. She was not property. She was not a victim. She was a woman, free in her heart, and she was choosing. He kissed her back, a deep, shuddering release. He picked her up as if she weighed nothing and carried her to the wide bed. It was not a night of practiced passion. It was slow. It was awkward. They were both trembling. They were two people who had forgotten how to be touched with tenderness. His hands were rough, but they were reverent. Her body, so long a source of shame, was a source of discovery. It was raw, and it was real. They cried, quietly, not for sadness, but for the sheer, painful, overwhelming relief of it. It was a joining not just of bodies, but of scars. It was not perfect. It was necessary. Afterward, in the quiet, he held her. He didn't let go. He held her as if she were the only anchor in the world. She lay with her head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. She had never, in her entire life, felt so completely safe. He whispered into her hair, his voice thick. "You're not a slave, Clara. You're not a burden." He pulled back, tilted her chin up so she had to look him in the eyes. His were clear, and they were full of a light she had never seen. "You were never bought," he said, his voice breaking. "You were just chosen." The burning of the past left the air clean. The cabin, once a shelter of convenience, became a home. The weeks that followed were a quiet revelation. The cautious distance between them dissolved, replaced by a warmth that settled into the logs and the floorboards. A comfortable, lived-in intimacy. They worked the ranch. Eli's long-held dream became their ranch. They were a team, moving with an unspoken rhythm. Clara, who had once struggled to lift the axe, now worked beside him. Her hands calloused, her body lean and strong. She planted a small garden near the cabin, her fingers sinking into the rich, dark soil, coaxing green shoots from the earth. It was an act of faith, a belief in a future she had never dared to imagine. Eli mended the fences that had fallen during the winter. His hammer blows a steady, comforting rhythm in the spring air. They talked. The long, silent nights were now filled with quiet conversation. He told her stories of the horses he had known, the mountains he had crossed. She told him about her childhood in the East, a life that seemed to belong to someone else, a girl who had liked the smell of rain and the taste of apples. They laughed. It was still a new sound for both of them, but it came more easily. A surprise of joy in the quiet. He would touch her, a hand on the small of her back as he passed her in the narrow space by the stove, his fingers brushing hers as they exchanged a tool. And at night, in the wide bed, there was no more distance. They slept tangled together, a tangle of limbs and shared breath, a bulwark against the ghosts that still sometimes scratched at the windows. He had chosen her. She had chosen him. It was a simple, profound truth that remade their world. The piece was so complete, so solid, that when the rider appeared, he seemed like a tear in the fabric of the sky. He came up the trail one bright, cold afternoon, when the sun was high and the new leaves on the aspens were a sharp, trembling green. Eli saw him first. He was mending a harness on the porch, and he went still, his hand freezing on the leather. "Clara," he said, his voice a low command. "Go inside. Lock the door." She looked up from her garden, her hands covered in dirt. She saw the rider, still a mile down the trail, a dark speck moving steadily closer. She saw the way Eli stood. He was not the man who held her at night. He was the man who had killed the cougar, the man who had faced the drifters. "Who is it?" she asked, wiping her hands on her trousers, her heart beginning a slow, heavy drum. "Just go inside," he said. He didn't take his eyes off the rider. She did not argue. She went in, latched the door, and took the rifle from its rack above the hearth. She checked the load, her hands steady. She was no longer the woman who hid. She stood by the small window, watching. The rider was not a drifter. He wore a heavy coat, and as he got closer, she saw the dull glint of a tin star on his chest. A lawman. He rode into the clearing and stopped, his horse blowing. He was a thick-set man, his face weathered and impassive. He looked at Eli. He looked at the cabin, his eyes lingering on Clara's face in the window. "Eli Turner?" the deputy asked. His voice was flat. "That's me," Eli said. He did not move. His hands were loose at his sides. "I'm Deputy Walsh, from Grit Creek. I have a warrant for your arrest." Clara's blood went cold. She gripped the rifle, her knuckles white. Eli's face was stone. "On what charge?" "Assault and abduction," Walsh said, as if reading from a list. "Jedediah Stone filed the complaint. Claims you came to his home, beat him near to death, and stole his wife." The lie was so bald, so audacious. It took Clara's breath away. Jed beaten. Jed hadn't been there. It was the drifters. "He's lying," Eli said, his voice deadly quiet. "Maybe," the deputy said, shrugging. "That's for the judge to sort out. What I know is, the woman you got in that cabin is legally his wife. The law says she belongs to him, and the law says you've got to come with me." "No." It was a single, flat word. Eli took one step, putting himself between the deputy and the cabin door. "She's not his, and I'm not going." The deputy's hand moved, resting on the butt of his pistol. "Turner, don't be a fool. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to enforce the law. You resist, and this gets a whole lot worse for both of you. I'll have to take you in by force, and I'll have to return the woman to her legal husband." The air crackled. Eli was a coiled spring. Clara knew, with chilling certainty, that he would kill this man, or die trying, before he let anyone take her. He would hang. He would hang for a crime he didn't commit, all to protect her. The cabin door opened. Clara stepped out onto the porch, the rifle held loosely in her hands, pointed at the ground. "Clara, no," Eli said, his voice tight. She ignored him. She looked at the deputy, her gaze as steady as his. "He's not lying, deputy," she said. Both men looked at her, stunned. "Eli Turner is not lying," she clarified, her voice ringing in the clear mountain air. "Jedediah Stone is Mr. Turner did not assault Jed, and he did not abduct me." Walsh looked at her, then at Eli. "Ma'am, that's a fine thing to say, but you're involved. It don't change the warrant." "Then the warrant is wrong," Clara said. "And Mr. Turner is not going to jail for me?" She looked at Eli, her eyes pleading, and then hardening with resolve. "I am going. Clara, I said no." Eli's voice was a roar. "And I said yes," she roared back, a strength in her he had never heard. "This isn't your fight, Eli. Not really. It's mine. It's about me. Jed is the one who broke the law. He's the one who did what he did. I will not let you hang for him. I am going to Grit Creek. I will stand in that court, and I will settle this. Myself." She walked down the steps, past Eli. She looked up at the deputy. "I will ride with you, sir, but Mr. Turner is coming too. Not as your prisoner, as my witness." Deputy Walsh looked at her. He saw no fear. He saw no weakness. He saw a woman who had drawn a line in the dirt. He looked at Eli, who was vibrating with a silent, protective rage, but who was also clearly letting this woman take the lead. The deputy sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "This is irregular, but—" "The pass is a long ride. I'd rather do it with one free man than one prisoner." He nodded. "All right, we ride now, both of you." The ride down the mountain was a cruel echo of the first time, but this time, Clara was not a humiliated, terrified captive on the back of Eli's horse. She rode the buckskin mare, her head high. Eli rode beside her, his face a mask of cold fury, his hand never far from the pistol at his hip. The deputy rode ahead, a silent, official presence. Clara felt a cold dread, but beneath it, a new, hard strength. She was not the same woman who had left this town. The dust, the wind, the mountains, they had scoured her clean. She was terrified of what was to come, but she was more terrified of going back to what she had been. When they reached the valley floor and the rutted track of Grit Creek, the town looked just as she remembered, mean, dusty, and judgmental. As they rode down the main street, people stopped. They came out of the general store, out of the land office. Men stopped pushing wheelbarrows. Women paused, laundry baskets on their hips. The whispering started. It was a low, ugly hiss, like snakes in dry grass. That's her. That's the one, the $5 wife. Look at her, riding in bold as brass, no shame. Heard he kept her up in the hills all winter. Wonder she can still walk. Jedediah's in the saloon, been crying into his whiskey for a week, saying he was robbed. Look at her, a $5 whore, turned wife. Disgusting. The words were sharp, aimed to wound. Clara felt each one like a small, stinging rock. She felt her face flush with a hot, terrible shame. She wanted to shrink, to hide. She felt Eli's hand cover hers, his fingers gripping tight on her rein. "Don't listen," he said, his voice a low growl. "Keep your head up. You're not who they say you are." She took a breath. She looked at him. He was looking at her, not the crowd, and in his eyes, she was not what they called her. She was just Clara. She straightened her back. She kept her eyes forward, fixed on the sheriff's office at the end of the street. She would not let them break her. The sheriff's office was a small, hot, crowded room. It smelled of stale tobacco, sweat, and cheap whiskey. A man sat at a high bench at the front, a makeshift courtroom. He was an older man, with a shock of white hair and deep, tired eyes that looked as if they had seen every sin Nevada had to offer. This was Judge Cyrus H. Blackwood, and in the front row, his face a mask of self-pity and venom, sat Jedediah Stone. His face was, as the warrant claimed, bruised, but it was the puffy, blotchy bruising of a drunkard who had lost a brawl, not the clean, sharp work of Eli's fists. "There he is," Jed shouted, jumping to his feet as they entered, pointing a shaking finger at Eli. "That's the man. He stole my wife, assaulted me." "Silence," the judge boomed, his voice surprisingly powerful. "You will sit, Mr. Stone, or I will have you removed." Jed sat, grumbling. Deputy Walsh explained the situation. The warrant, the claim, the irregularity of Clara's arrival. The judge looked at them, his gaze lingering on Clara. "Mr. Stone, you will make your claim." Jed stood. He was a performer. He spoke of his humble home, his love for his wife. He told a wild, elaborate lie about Eli Turner, a stranger, coming to his cabin, beating him senseless, and dragging his screaming, protesting wife away. "She's my wife, Your Honor. The law, the Bible, says so. He took my property. I want her back, and I want him hanged." The judge listened, his face impassive. When Jed was finished, sputtering with his own false righteousness, the judge turned his gaze. "Mr. Turner, your response." Eli stood. He was not a man of words. In this room, these people, this law, it was a trap. "He's lying," Eli said. "I never went to his cabin. I never touched him." "Then how did you come to be with his wife?" the judge asked. Eli hesitated. He looked at Clara. He would not be the one to tell this story. He would not be the one to shame her. She came with me." Jed laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "See, he admits it. He took her." "Quiet," the judge snapped. He looked at Clara. "You have been quiet, madam. You are the property in question. Do you have a voice? Do you have anything to say?" Clara's heart was hammering so hard she thought it would break from her chest. The room was silent. Every eye was on her. The men from the saloon, who had watched, were in the back, curious. She stood. She walked to the front of the room, past Eli, past Jed. She did not look at her husband. She stood before the judge, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "My name is Clara," she said. Her voice was small, but it was clear. It did not shake. "Mrs. Stone," the judge prompted, gently. "My name is Clara." she repeated, firmer. I was his wife. She gestured to Jed, but did not look at him. For 2 years, he did not treat me as a wife. He treated me as a dog. He took my food. He took my money. And he beat me. A murmur went through the room. Jed jumped up. That's a lie, a whore's lie. Mr. Stone, the judge said, his voice dropping to a dangerous cold. If you speak again without my permission, you will be in contempt. Sit down. Jed sat. Go on, child, the judge said to Clara. We were starving, Clara said, her voice gaining strength as the truth, so long held in, finally came out. He took our last bit of money. He went to the saloon, the pick gavel. He went to play cards. The men in the back of the room shifted, their faces suddenly pale. He lost, Clara said, her voice raw. He lost everything, and he got angry. He decided he had one more thing to sell. He put me up for sale. The room went dead silent. The judge's eyes widened. Just slightly. He leaned forward. He asked for bids, Clara continued, her voice breaking. But she pushed on. He asked for a price. For his wife. For me. She finally looked at Jed. He was pale, sweating, his eyes wide with fear. And the men, she said, her voice rising. The men in that saloon, they just watched until Mr. Turner, he offered $5. The room gasped. It was a single, collective intake of breath. $5, Clara repeated, the words tasting like ash. And a saddle repair. That was my price. That was what my husband, what he said I was worth, and he took the money. He took the $5, and he shoved me at Mr. Turner, and he told him, she's yours. Good riddance. She was crying now, silent tears of shame and rage, but she did not stop. Mr. Turner did not abduct me. He bought me. He bought me from my legal husband, in a public saloon, in front of 20 witnesses. He did not beat Jedediah Stone. He saved me from him. He took me away from a man who sold me for the price of a bottle of whiskey. She looked at the judge, her eyes pleading. Your Honor, what law, what God, says I must belong to that man? He did not treat me as a wife. He treated me as property. He sold his property. The sale is done. I declare myself free, she finished, trembling, exhausted, the words hanging in the hot, still air. The judge was silent for a long, long time. He looked at Clara. He looked at Jed, who had shrunk in his chair, trying to make himself invisible. He looked at the men in the back, the witnesses, who were now staring at their boots, their faces grim. Mr. Harris, the judge called out. A man in the back flinched. You were there, were you not? You own the saloon. The bartender, Harris, swallowed. He stepped forward. Yes, Your Honor, I was there. And is what this woman says true? Did Jedediah Stone sell her? Harris looked at Jed, and then at Clara. He sighed. Yes, sir, it happened. Just as she said, $5, and a saddle repair. The judge's face went dark, a deep, slow flush of anger. He turned his gaze on Jed. Jed looked up, and his face crumbled. Your Honor, I was drunk, Jed whined. It was just a joke, a tavern joke. I want her back. A joke. The judge's voice was a roar that shook the room. He stood, leaning over the bench. You call that a joke, sir? You take a woman, your wife, and you put a price on her head in a saloon, and you call it a joke? He slammed his gavel. This court is not a tavern, and that woman is not a horse to be traded. You, sir, are a disgrace to this town, to this territory, and to your own name. You have, by your own admission, and by the testimony of witnesses, abdicated any and all rights you had as a husband. You treated this woman not as a partner, but as chattel. And so, as chattel, she has been sold. He pointed a shaking finger at Jed. This marriage is a mockery. It is an insult to the laws of God and man. I am granting this woman, Clara, a full and immediate annulment. She is free of you. Your claim is void. The charges of assault and abduction against Mr. Turner are dismissed. And you should thank God that he is not pressing charges against you for this malicious, false complaint. He slammed the gavel again. Get out of my courtroom. Get out of my sight. Jed stumbled to his feet, his face a mask of hate and terror. He looked at Clara, his eyes promising murder. But the crowd in the courtroom, the men who had been silent, were now on their feet, their faces hard and disgusted. They parted for him, letting him pass. But it was not with respect. It was with contempt. He fled the room. The courtroom slowly cleared. The townsfolk filed out, silent, looking at Clara with a new, strange expression. It was not pity. It was awe. Finally, it was just the three of them. The judge, Eli, and Clara. The judge sat down, his anger gone, leaving him looking old and tired. He looked at Clara. Miss, he said, his voice gentle, I have declared you free. You are beholden to no man, not him. He paused. And not Mr. Turner. The transaction in the saloon. It has no legal standing. It was a moral act, perhaps, but not a legal one. You are, for the first time in your life, I suspect, entirely your own. He looked at Eli. Mr. Turner, you did a decent thing, a brave thing, but a dangerous one. The law is a clumsy tool. Son, be careful. He nodded, gathered his papers, and left them alone in the empty, quiet room. They walked out onto the boardwalk. The sun was high and bright, and it felt like the first day of the world. Clara felt light, giddy. She was free, free. The word was a wild bird in her chest. She looked at Eli. He was standing beside her, but he seemed 1,000 miles away. He was watching her, his face serious and full of a deep, familiar pain. Clara, he said, his voice quiet. She turned to him, her smile fading. He's right, Eli said. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The judge, he's right. You're free, for real, this time. You don't belong to Jed. And you don't belong to me. He gestured, his hand stiff, toward the stagecoach office across the street. You can go anywhere. Carson City, Sacramento. You could go back east. I'll give you the money. I have it, enough for a ticket, and to get you started. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe me your future. He was doing it. He was giving her the choice he had always promised her. He was standing there, his heart in his eyes, and he was telling her to leave. She looked at him, at this good, solid, scarred man who had saved her, who had healed with her, who had shown her a rage that terrified him and a tenderness that had remade her. She looked at his pained, honest face, and she thought he was the biggest fool she had ever met. And what if my future, she said softly, is in the high country? He looked up, confused, hope and fear warring in his face. What if, she went on, it's not in Carson City? What if it's on a small ranch, with a garden and a herd of cattle, and a quiet man who knows how to mend a fence, and kill a cougar, and build a box for the past? Clara, he whispered, his voice thick. I don't, what are you saying? She stepped closer, right into his space, so she could feel the heat of him. She took his rough, scarred hand in hers. Eli Turner, you are a fool. I don't want to go to Carson. I don't want your money for a ticket. I want to go home. But what am I to you? He asked, his voice breaking. I bought you. I'm the man who paid. You're the man I choose, she said, her voice fierce. But I won't be a $5 wife. I won't be a woman you're just keeping. I won't be a shadow in your cabin. I've been free for 10 minutes, Eli, and I know what I want to do with it. She took a deep breath, her heart hammering, but not with fear, with a wild, terrifying joy. Marry me, Eli, she said, for real, in the light, with a ring, if you still want me. He stared at her. He was speechless. He, the man of no words, had none. So he acted. He pulled her into his arms, right there on the boardwalk of Grit Creek, in front of the saloon and the general store. He pulled her against him, and he kissed her. It was not a kiss of tenderness or of need. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated relief. It was a kiss that tasted of dust and sunlight and a future. And he did not care who watched. The town, for all its gossip, could watch them. He had his wife. They bought a ring, a thin, simple gold band from the general store, costing them more than it was worth. But it was solid. It was real. They didn't go to the judge. They didn't seek out a preacher. They walked to the edge of town, to the small, wind-beaten church that stood alone, its paint peeling. They didn't go inside. They went to the churchyard, to the grove of cottonwood trees that grew by the river, the fast, cold water that ran down from their mountains. The spring wind was in the new leaves, a sound like a promise. There were no guests. There was no one to stand for them, just them, and the wide, open sky. They didn't know the proper words, so they used their own. He stood before her, his hat in his hands, his dark hair ruffled by the wind. He took her left hand. His was shaking. Eli, he said, his voice thick and raw. I take you, Clara, to protect, and to honor, and to build with. He looked her in the eyes, his own shining. I am not your owner. I am your husband. He slid the simple gold band onto her finger. It was warm from his hand. She was crying, the tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. Clara, she said, her voice breaking, but strong. I take you, Eli, to heal with, and to trust, and to love. She put her other hand on his cheek. I am not your burden. I am your wife. He leaned in, and he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was not a kiss of discovery. It was a kiss of survival. It was a kiss that sealed a vow made not to God, but to each other. It was the taste of home. They turned, walked to their horses, and mounted. He reached over, took her hand, the one with the new, bright ring. They rode out of Grit Creek, side by side, their hands clasped between them. They rode toward the high, lonely mountains, which were no longer a prison, but a home. The ride home from Grit Creek was quiet, but the silence was of a different kind. It was not the empty, aching silence of two strangers, nor the electric, tense silence of new desire. It was the full, heavy, comfortable silence of a man and a woman who had spoken their vows by a river, and who knew, with a certainty that settled in their bones, that they were finally, truly, going home. Life on the ranch bloomed. It was a literal blooming. At first, Clara, with a fierce, almost desperate energy, attacked the small patch of land near the cabin. The plot that had been his small vegetable patch became her garden. She turned the soil, her hands, now calloused and brown, sinking into the damp, rich earth. She planted potatoes and onions, yes, but also beans and corn and squash, and in a small, protected box by the door. She planted herbs. She had found a few straggling, wild-growing plants, sage and thyme, and she cultivated them, her movements tender. She was planting roots, not just for the food, but for her own soul. Eli watched her, a quiet, deep-seated wonder in his eyes. This land, which had been his refuge from the world, was now becoming a home, and it was her hands that were making it so. He, in turn, began to build. The small lean-to barn was not enough, not for a married couple, not for a future. We need chickens, Clara announced one morning, her hands on her hips, her face smudged with dirt from the garden. If we're to stay the winter, we need eggs. So, they built a chicken coop. It was their first project as husband and wife. It was a small, tight, sturdy structure, built from timber Eli cut and planed himself. Clara was not a bystander. She was his partner. She held the board steady while he sawed. She learned to hammer the nails. Her first few blows clumsy and crooked, but her last one straight and true. She fetched and carried. When it was done, and they had traded a hide in a nearby settlement for 6 scrawny, clucking hens, Clara felt a pride so fierce it almost hurt. It was theirs. They had made it. Next was the wagon. Eli had an old, broken-down farm wagon that had come with the property. Its wheels shattered, its axle split. It had sat behind the barn for years, a symbol of defeat, rotting into the earth. Eli, the lone man, had no use for it. He could carry what he needed on his pack mule. But now, there was a wagon, Eli said, his voice thoughtful, as he stared at the wreck. We could haul more wood. We could bring more supplies back. From a real town. We could visit that settlement where we got the hens, Clara added, her mind already working. Bring back more than just a few sacks. So, they restored the broken wagon. It was a long, slow, arduous task. They had to fell a specific tree, an oak, and Eli, with painstaking care. Taught Clara how to cure the wood, and how to carve the new spokes. He mended the axle with hot iron and sweat. She patched the canvas cover, her stitches small and tight. Just as she had patched his clothes, it was in this work that Clara truly found her new self. The thin, bruised, terrified woman in the calico dress was gone. That woman had been burned in the box. The new Clara, Mrs. Turner, was strong. She wore a pair of Eli's old trousers, cinched at the waist with a rope, and one of his flannel shirts. The sleeves rolled up to her elbows. The clothes were practical, allowing her to move, to lift, to work beside him. She was no longer a dependent. She was an equal. Her confidence grew from the soil, from the wood, from the sureness of her own hands. She rode the buckskin mare with an easy confidence, her seat firm, her gaze clear. She knew the land. Now, she knew the call of the hawks, the smell of the pine, the exact moment the sun would hit the high peaks. She was, in every way, his partner. Their nights were a continuation of their days. The raw, desperate need of their first encounters had settled, like good whiskey, into a deep, abiding, quiet trust. They would sit by the fire, her mending, him carving or cleaning his rifle, their shoulders companionably brushing. They would talk of the day's work, of plans for the next, and when they went to the wide bed, their coming together was no longer about healing wounds. It was about a shared, profound, and simple belonging. But the West was a hard country. It gave, but it always took the spring, which had come with such a roar of melting snow, faded. The summer arrived, and it was not a season of gentle warmth. It was a fist, the sun, a merciless white eye, beat down on the high country. The rains, which should have come in gentle afternoon showers, simply stopped. The creek, the one that ran from the high snowpack, the lifeblood of their ranch, began to shrink. It turned from a clear, cold rush to a sluggish, shallow stream. Clara's garden, her pride, began to suffer. The leaves on her bean plants turned yellow and curled. The soil, once so dark and rich, turned to a fine, pale dust that rose in clouds with every step. But it was the cattle that were the real worry. The grass in the high meadow, which should have been knee-high and green, was brown and brittle by July. The cattle, their small herd, their entire future, grew thin. Their ribs began to show. They spent their days huddled in the sparse shade of the pines, their heads down, too tired to graze. Eli grew quiet. It was a different quiet than before. It was the old, hard, stoic quiet of the lone man, the man who knew how to suffer and how to cut his losses. He would stand on the porch at sunset, staring at the brassy, cloudless sky, his face carved in lines of worry. "It's no good, Clara," he said one night, his voice flat, devoid of hope. They were at the table, a meager meal of beans and stale bread between them. "The creek's almost dry, the grass is gone. They won't make it to the first snow." "It will rain," Clara insisted, her voice tight with a fear she would not name. "No," he said. "It won't. Not in time. I've seen this before. A high country drought. It'll hold on until the winter breaks it." He pushed his plate away, his food untouched. I'll have to sell them, drive them to Carson, take what I can get for them, before they're just bones. He was retreating. He was going back to the only survival he knew. Alone. He was cutting the ranch and their shared dream. Loose. No! Clara's voice was sharp. He looked up, surprised by her tone. No, she said again, her voice fierce. She stood, her hands clenched at her sides. We are not selling. We are not giving up. We built that coop. We fixed that wagon. We are not just letting this go. Clara, it's not about giving up, he said, his voice full of a tired frustration. It's about surviving. There is no feed. There is no water. That is the beginning and the end of it. Then we get feed, she shot back. Get it from where? The sky? The rocks? From the settlement, she said, her mind racing. Sutter's Fork, where we got the hens. It's a 3-day ride, but they have a general store. They must have hay or grain, something, enough to get us through. Eli stared at her. Clara, that's 100 miles, round trip, in this heat, and what do we use for money? We have almost nothing. We have the mule, she said, and we have those traps, the beaver pelts, the ones you said were prime. It's not enough, not for what we'd need. It will be enough for something, she insisted, her whole body thrumming with a desperate, stubborn energy. It will be enough to show we are not just rolling over. I will not let our cattle starve. Eli, he looked at her, at this woman who had once been a bruised shadow, now standing like a general, her eyes blazing. I'll go, he said, standing. I'll take the wagon. No, she said, her voice firm. You are the only one who knows where to find water. You are the only one who can keep this herd alive, move them to the last patches of grass. If you go, they will be dead by the time you return. I'm going. I can drive the wagon. We've fixed it. I will take the buckskin mare and the mule. I will go to Sutter's Fork, and I will bring back feed. He wanted to argue. He wanted to forbid it. It was too dangerous. The trail was hard. There were men, drifters, the heat, but he looked at her face, at the set of her jaw, and he knew 2 things. First, she was right. He had to stay. And second, this was not a woman who could be forbidden anything. She was his partner. He sighed, the fight going out of him, replaced by a deep, grudging, and profound respect. All right, he said. You go. The journey was brutal. The sun was relentless. The dust was a living thing, a choking, gritty cloud that coated her skin, her clothes, her lungs. But Clara felt a strange, hard joy. She was on her own. She was not a captive, not a refugee. She was a rancher, a wife, on a mission to save her home. She reached Sutter's Fork on the 3rd day, the animals exhausted, her own body aching. It was not a town, just a handful of buildings clustered around a wide, muddy crossing, a general store, a blacksmith, and 2 or 3 small, desperate-looking homesteads. She went into the store, the bell above the door jangling. It was dark, cool, and smelled of coffee, leather, and dried apples. A thin, tired-looking man stood behind the counter. Help you, ma'am? I need feed, Clara said, her voice hoarse from the dust. Hay, grain, anything you have. The man shook his head, a look of genuine pity on his face. Sorry, ma'am, the drought. I'm sold out. Have been for a week. What little I had, the locals took. I've got nothing, not a bale. Clara's heart sank. She had come all this way. She had failed. She leaned against the counter, the exhaustion of the trip and the weight of her defeat hitting her all at once. You look like you could use some water, ma'am. She nodded, numbly. Agnes, the man called. Bring some water for this lady. A woman emerged from the back room, a tin cup in her hand. She was older than Clara, perhaps in her mid-40s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that were as kind as the storekeeper's were tired. Here you are, dear, the woman said, her voice a low, warm hum. You look all done in. Clara drank the water. It was cool, from a deep well. Thank you, she whispered. She looked at the storekeeper. You're sure? There's nothing? Our cattle, they're starving. The man just shook his head again. I'm sorry, dear. The woman, Agnes said, touching Clara's arm. It's a hard year. My husband, he says it's the worst he's seen in 20. Clara looked at this woman, at her kind, weathered face. You live here? Just outside of town, Agnes said, her face softening. My husband, Amos, he runs the smithy. I just help my brother, Silas, here at the store. She looked at Clara, a long, appraising look. You're new. You're from the high country, aren't you? The Turner homestead? Clara was stunned. You know us? We know of you, Agnes said, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. News travels, even up from Grit Creek. Clara flushed, the old shame rising. She knew what they were saying. The $5 wife. Agnes saw the look on her face, and her expression changed. It became one of recognition. She put her hand on Clara's arm. You come in the back, she said, her voice firm, but kind. You come have some coffee. You look like you need more than just water. Clara, confused, followed her into the small, clean sitting room behind the store. Agnes poured 2 cups of coffee, and they sat. I know what they say, Agnes said quietly, looking into her cup. Townsfolk, they got nothing better to do than wag their tongues. They don't know the first thing about survival. Clara stared at her. My first husband, Agnes said, her voice flat, was a drunkard. He ran the freight line. He beat me every Saturday, like it was church. Clara's hand tightened on her cup, the heat scalding her, but she didn't move. I left him, Agnes continued. I ran, in the middle of the night. Took me a week to walk here. I was near dead when Amos, my husband now, found me. I was by the side of the road. My feet. Well, they weren't good. He took me in. He fed me. He was the blacksmith. He was just a good man. People talked. Oh, how they talked. The blacksmith's whore. The runaway. They didn't know. They didn't know what I had run from. She looked up, and her kind eyes were full of a deep, hard-won wisdom. This West child, it's full of us, full of women who ran, women who were abandoned, women who were sold, beaten, left for dead. It's the hidden story, ain't it? The men, they talk about their battles with the land, with the natives, with each other. They don't talk about the battles we're fighting. Clara was weeping. Quiet, slow tears. Not for herself, for this woman. For them. I thought I was the only one, Clara whispered. Oh, child, Agnes said, reaching across the table and taking Clara's hand. Her grip was strong, calloused. You are never the only one. We are everywhere. We are the survivors. We're the ones who build, who plant, who make a home out of the ashes. You look at me. Clara, you are not what they call you. You are a pioneer. You are a survivor. Just like me, Agnes smiled. A bright, fierce thing. Now, feed. Silas is right. We have no hay. But Amos, he has a patch of corn. It's stunted. The cobs are small. But it's something. He was saving it for his own mule, but I think he'd agree. Your cattle need it more. When Clara left Sutter's Fork the next morning, the wagon was not empty. It was loaded with sacks of stunted, dried corn. It wasn't much, but it was hope. She also left with Agnes's story, a gift that was far more sustaining. She was not a scandal. She was not alone. She was part of a silent, powerful sisterhood. She rode fast, pushing the animals, her heart light, despite the heat. She was a survivor. She was a pioneer. She was 2 miles from the ranch, coming up the final canyon, when she smelled it, smoke. It was not the gentle, pine-scented smoke of her own chimney. It was the sharp, acrid, terrifying smell of a grass fire. She whipped the wagon, the animals lurching forward. She rounded the last bend. Her heart stopped. A wall of fire, 5, 6 feet high, was eating its way across their lower pasture. It was moving fast, on a hot, dry wind, heading straight for the barn. She saw Eli. He was a small, desperate figure, a black silhouette against the orange flames. He was running, a wet blanket in his hands, beating at the fire. He was one man against an ocean of flames, and he was losing. Clara didn't think. She acted. She pulled the wagon to a halt, the animals rearing, their eyes white with terror. She jumped down, grabbed her own axe from the side of the wagon. "Eli!" she screamed, her voice tearing. He turned, his face black with soot, his eyes wide with a desperate, hopeless relief. "The horses! Clara! The barn! Get the horses!" The fire was already licking at the side of the coop, the chickens screaming. She had no time. The barn, their life. She ran. The heat was a physical blow, a solid wall. The barn door was stuck. She used the axe, splintering the wood, and threw it open. Inside, it was a hell of smoke and terror. Eli's roan and her buckskin mare were tied. They were screaming, a high, terrible animal sound, kicking the stalls, trying to break free. "I'm here!" Clara yelled, her voice choking on the smoke. "I'm here! I'm sorry!" She ran to the roan first, fumbling with the knot, the horse's head thrashing. It tried to bite her, in its terror. "No! Eli, stop!" she commanded, her voice the one she used to calm him. The horse, hearing her, quieted for a bare second. It was enough. She got the rope free. She slapped its rump, and it bolted from the barn, a red shadow, running for the river. She turned to the buckskin. A burning timber from the loft fell, showering the hay with sparks. The mare screamed. "It's me, girl!" Clara sobbed, pulling her own scarf over the mare's eyes, blinding her. "Trust me." She untied her. She didn't let this one go. She grabbed the rope, and she pulled, dragging the terrified, half-blinded animal out of the burning barn and into the searing air. She ran, pulling the mare, until they were on a patch of ground the fire had already passed, a black, smoking scar. She tied the horse to a rock and ran back. Eli was on his knees. The fire was past him, a roaring monster, now at the river's edge, where it would, perhaps, die. The barn was standing, but it was a smoking, blackened skeleton. The coop was gone. The pasture was a field of black ash. Eli was in the middle of it. He was not hurt. He was just stopped. He was covered in soot, his clothes smoking, his hands burned. He was breathing in great, ragged, tearing gasps. Clara ran to him, stumbling over the hot, ashy ground. "Eli, are you hurt? Eli!" He looked up at her. His face, under the soot, was white. It was the face of the boy under the porch. The man who had seen everything he had built, everything he had finally built, turned to ash. He had fought the fire. He had saved the cabin, but he had lost the pasture. He had lost the barn. The feed she had just brought was still on the wagon, safe, but the hay he had stored, it was all gone. He looked at her, at his strong, brave, capable wife, the wife he was supposed to protect, the wife he was supposed to provide for, and he had failed. He collapsed. He didn't just sit, he collapsed, sinking to his knees in the hot ash, and he put his burned, blistered hands over his face, and he cried. It was not a quiet, stoic tear. It was a breakdown. His whole body shook with a deep, racking, tearing sound that came from the very bottom of his soul. It was the first time he had broken, the first time he had allowed himself to break, since he was 8 years old. He wept for the pasture, for the barn, for his mother, for the cattle, for the terrifying, overwhelming fear that he could not protect this one good thing he had. Clara, her own heart breaking, did not speak. She did not panic. She did not offer empty words. She just knelt in the ash with him. She put her arms around him, her own face black with soot, her hands raw. She held him, her grip as strong as Agnes's, her presence as solid as the mountains. She held him while he broke. She was his anchor. She was his home. She let him cry until the sobs quieted, until he was just a man, shaking and empty, in her arms. He finally pulled back, his face a mask of shame. "Clara, I lost it. The barn." She put her sooty fingers to his lips, silencing him. She looked him in the eyes, her own gaze clear and fierce, and full of a love that was as hard as oak. "It's just wood, Eli," she said, her voice a low, rough rasp. "It's just grass." She gestured to the smoking ruins, to the black, dead field. "We'll build everything again," she promised, her voice not breaking. "Just like we built us." He looked at her, at this impossible, strong woman, and he believed her. That night, they were too tired to speak. They washed in the cold, clear water of the river, the moon a pale, silver disk in the smoke-hazed sky. They scrubbed the soot and the shame from each other's skin, their hands gentle, their movements slow, in the wide bed. They did not make love. They just held. It was an intimacy that went beyond passion. It was a deeper, quieter, more profound thing. It was not the joining of two bodies, but the merging of two souls. He put his head on her chest, a man who had been broken and was now being remade, and he listened to the steady, strong beat of her heart. She held him, her hand tangled in his hair, her eyes open, staring into the dark. They had lost the pasture. They had lost the barn. But they had not lost each other. They were a single unit, forged in the fire and rooted in the ash. The fire was a baptism. The ashes were a foundation. Months passed. The ranch, blackened and scarred, did not die. It healed, and so did they. The corn Clara had brought from Sutter's Fork, a small, desperate hope, had saved the last of their cattle. The drought broke, as all things must, giving way to a wet, heavy autumn, and with the rain, new grass, a stubborn, faint green, pushed its way up through the black. They rebuilt the barn. It was a longer, harder task than building the coop, but this time they were not two strangers, but a husband and a wife. They worked as a single unit, their movements practiced, their silence comfortable. The new barn was stronger than the old one, its beams thicker, its foundation set deeper in the earth. It was a structure built not of hope, but of certainty. Their love, too, was no longer a fragile, hesitant thing. It was not the desperate, clinging need of two survivors, nor the electric discovery of new passion. It had settled. It was rooted in the shared pain of their pasts, the shared labor of their present, and the quiet, unspoken promise of their future. It was in the way he handed her a tool without her asking, and the way she knew, just by the set of his shoulders, when he was in pain. It was a love as solid and as real as the stone chimney of their cabin. As the ranch stabilized, their world, once so small and isolated, began to widen. Clara, tending her now thriving garden, became known. Agnes, from Sutter's Fork, rode up to see her, bringing a gift of apple cuttings. She saw Clara's rows of herbs, the drying bunches of sage and yarrow hanging from the porch. "You have the touch, child," Agnes said, her kind eyes appraising. A healing touch. Word spread. In the quiet way of the high country, another woman, from a homestead 10 miles east, came to her. Her child had a fever, and the cough was deep. Clara, her hands steady, her voice calm, made a tea of thyme and horehound. She sat with the woman, and they talked. The woman spoke of her loneliness, her fear of the vast, empty land. Clara listened, and then she shared her own story. Not the saloon, not the shame, but the fear, the fire, the rebuilding. She became a safe harbor. The women of the nearby settlements, women like Agnes, women who had survived their own hidden battles, began to come to her. They came for herbs, for remedies, but they stayed for the stories. They stayed for the quiet. Strong woman who had been through the fire and had not been consumed. Clara, who had felt so utterly alone, had found her sisterhood. Eli, too. had changed. The darkness that had haunted him, the specter of his father's rage, had been brought into the light. He was no longer a hermit, hiding from the world and from himself. His skill with horses, his quiet, gentle way, was a rarity. A local homesteader, a young man named Silas, brought him a wild, half-starved Mustang, its eyes rolling with terror. "I can't break him, Mr. Turner," Silas said, frustrated and angry. He's just mean. I'm of a mind to shoot him." Eli looked at the horse, and in its terrified eyes, he saw himself. He saw the boy, the drifters, the cougar. "He's not mean," Eli said, his voice quiet. "He's afraid." Clara watched from the porch as her husband went to work. He did not use a whip. He did not use spurs. He used time. He used patience. He stood in the corral for hours, just letting the horse see him. He spoke in a low, soothing rumble. He taught the young man to wait, to breathe, to ask, not to demand. He taught him that breaking a thing was not the same as earning its trust. He was teaching the local boys, the young, hard men of this new land, how to be strong without being cruel. He was breaking the cycle. He was becoming the man his father had never been. Their life was modest, but it was full, it was stable. The past was a scar, but it was a scar that had healed over, strong and white. And then, one day, the past rode in. It was a bright, clear afternoon, the kind that feels like a blessing. Eli was in the new corral with Silas, working with the Mustang, which now ate from his hand. Clara was in her garden, on her knees, planting the last of her bean seeds. A rider appeared on the trail. Clara did not recognize him at first. He was thin, gaunt, his clothes in rags. He rode a sway-backed, broken-winded horse. He looked like a ghost, a drifter. But as he rode into the clearing, she saw his face, and her blood ran cold. It was Jedediah Stone. He was not the self-pitying drunk from the courtroom. He was something far more dangerous. His eyes were hollow, but they burned with a cold, clear, and terrible hate. He had a pistol on his hip, and a rifle lay across his lap. Eli saw him. He moved, putting himself between Jed and Silas. "Silas," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Go to the cabin, now." Jed stopped his horse in the middle of the yard, 20 paces from the porch, 20 paces from the corral. He looked at the new barn. He looked at the neat, thriving garden. He looked at Eli, solid and calm, and he looked at Clara. She was standing, her hands covered in dirt, her face pale. She was wearing trousers. Her hair was cut short. For practicality, she looked strong. She looked like a stranger. "So," Jed sneered, his voice a dry, rattling whisper. "This is the palace. This is what you got for my $5. You're not welcome here." "Jed," Eli said, his voice flat. He was moving slowly, angling away from the corral, toward the cabin, toward Clara. "Not welcome?" Jed laughed, a high, cracking, unhinged sound. "I ain't welcome. That's my wife, Turner. That's my property. You stole her. This is all mine. You stole my life." "She's not your wife," Eli said, his hands loose. "The law said so." "You need to ride on. The law?" Jed spat. "Your law. Your trick. You turned them all against me. You took her and you turned her into that, a whore in pants, my property." He was not just here for Clara. He was here for the home, the life, the respect he had squandered and that they had built. He was a man with nothing, and he had come to destroy the one thing that proved he was a failure. Eli was still 10 yards from the porch. Clara was on the porch. The cabin door was open, just behind her. "Eli, no," Clara said. Her voice was not a whisper. It was a command. Eli stopped. Clara stepped forward. She was not the woman Jed remembered. She was not the bruised, cowering thing from Grit Creek. She was Clara Turner. She was a survivor. "I am not your property, Jed," she said, her voice clear and cold, carrying across the yard. "I was never your wife. I was your prisoner." Jed's face twisted, his madness flaring. He was losing, again. He was being shamed, again. You shut your mouth. You get your things. You're coming with me." He raised the rifle, pointing it not at her, but at Eli. "He's the one. He's the one who took you. You're mine, and I'm taking you back. But first, he pays." Clara moved. She was not a victim. She was a pioneer. She was a wife. In one smooth, practiced motion, she stepped back, inside the cabin door, and grabbed the rifle from the rack by the hearth. It was the one Eli had used on the cougar. It was the one she used to hunt rabbits. It was always loaded. She stepped back onto the porch. Jed was still leveling his rifle at Eli, his finger tightening on the trigger, a wild, triumphant grin on his face. "No," Clara said. Jed turned his head, his grin faltering in confusion. "You sold," Clara said, her voice like ice. "What you never owned." Jed snarled, his rage finally breaking. He forgot Eli. He swung the rifle toward her. He was going to kill the thing he could not have. He tried to shoot Eli. That was the moment. He saw Eli as the true thief. He swung the rifle. His aim jerky. Clara was faster. She was not trembling. She was not afraid. She was protecting her home. She was protecting her husband. She fired. The sound of the shot was immense. A single, sharp crack that split the clear afternoon air. Jed's rifle went off, the shot going wild, burying itself in the dirt. He cried out, a high, thin scream, and clutched his leg. He toppled from his horse, collapsing into the dust, his rifle clattering beside him. He writhed, clutching his thigh, where a dark, wet stain was spreading. Clara stood on the porch, the rifle smoking in her hands. She had not aimed for his chest. She had aimed for his leg. She had not killed him. She had stopped him. She had saved Eli's life. Eli was frozen, staring at her. He was staring at his wife, this woman of iron and grace. He looked at Jed, howling in the dust. He looked at Clara, standing tall, the smoke clearing around her. The door of the cabin opened, and Silas peered out, his face white. "Go to him," Clara said, her voice shaking, the adrenaline fading, leaving her weak. "Eli, go to him, tie his hands, use his own belt, and tie up that leg. He'll bleed to death." Eli moved. He did as she said. Jed was sobbing, a mixture of pain and defeated rage. "Go, Silas," Eli commanded. "Ride to Grit Creek. Get Deputy Walsh. Ride fast." The law arrived 3 hours later. Deputy Walsh rode into the yard, his face grim. He found a scene he had not expected. Jedediah Stone, his hands bound, his leg crudely but effectively bandaged, lay groaning by the porch. Eli Turner was cleaning his rifle in the corral, and Clara Turner was sitting on her porch steps, her hands in her lap, watching the sunset. "Ma'am," Walsh said, tipping his hat, "it seems you've had some trouble." They told him the full story. The courtroom, Jed's threats, his arrival, his demands. Eli told him how Jed had aimed at him. Clara told him how she had fired. Jed, for his part, just raved. He called her a whore, a thief, a witch. He claimed they had shot him in cold blood. But the evidence was clear. Jed's own rifle, one shot fired, lay in the dust. Eli's pistol was still in its holster, and Clara's story, told in her calm, steady voice, was unbreakable. "Attempted murder," Walsh said, nodding, as he hauled Jed to his feet. On top of everything else, that judge, he don't take kindly to people ignoring his verdicts, or to men who think wives are property. Jedediah Stone was sentenced to 20 years of hard labor in the territorial prison. He was gone, the shadow that had lingered. The ghost of that $5 transaction was finally, truly, banished. The community, which had already begun to see Clara differently, now saw her as she was. The gossip in Grit Creek, the whispers in Sutter's Fork, they changed. The $5 wife was a story of the past. The story now was of Clara Turner, the rancher's wife, the healer, the woman who had saved her husband's life, who had faced down her own demon and won. She was not a scandal. She was a survivor. She was one of them. The seasons turned. The ranch was peaceful. The hard work of the summer gave way to the quiet preparations for winter. Their life was good. One afternoon, in the soft, golden light of late summer, Eli found Clara in her garden, but she was not tending the vegetables. She was kneeling by a new patch of turned earth, near the cabin, under the shade of a small aspen. She was planting something. "What's that?" he asked. Sitting on his heels beside her, she was planting wildflowers, seeds she had gathered from the high meadow, blue lupine, and red paintbrush. "It's for her," Clara said softly, her hands smoothing the dark soil. Eli was quiet. He understood. "She deserves a grave," Clara said, not looking at him, her voice thick. The woman the one who was sold, the one who was so afraid." She looked up at him, her eyes clear, a sad, gentle smile on her face. "She died, a long time ago, right here, and I wanted to mark the place. She deserves to rest." Eli said nothing. He took her dirt-covered hand, and he kissed her knuckles. He knelt there with her, in the quiet, as she planted a grave of flowers for the ghost she had finally laid to rest. The sun was setting. The sky was a blaze of orange and deep, velvet purple. The high peaks were black against the light. Clara was standing on the porch, her hands resting on the rail, watching the day end. The air was cool, smelling of pine and the promise of autumn. Eli came out of the cabin. He stood behind her. He did not put his arms around her waist. He knelt. He knelt on the rough porch boards, and he gently, so gently, put his arms around her. He pressed his face to the soft curve of her belly, a new, gentle swell that was hidden beneath her work dress. He kissed her, a slow, reverent kiss, a promise to the new life that was growing within her, the child of their new, unbroken line. Clara put her hands on his head, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. She closed her eyes. He stood. Then he came to her side, and he took her hand. The simple gold band on her finger was worn from work, but it was solid. They stood together, hand in hand, on the porch of the home they had built and rebuilt. They watched the land, their land, stretch out wide and golden in the last light. The past was behind them, a garden of wildflowers. The future, uncertain and wild, was their own. Thank you for listening to this story from Wild West. We hope it touched your heart. We'd love to know where you're listening from, so please, drop a comment and say hello. Your thoughts and feelings are what make these stories come alive, so share them with us in English. And if you'd like to hear more tales of survival, love, and the raw, untamed heart of the American West, please subscribe. We have many more stories to tell.